Hello and welcome to the Flix Forum podcast, where each episode we go back and we look at a Netflix original film in the order of release. Today we have Netflix 313th film from 2020. It's the Christmas comedy, The Christmas Chronicles Part 2. It's directed by Chris Columbus and stars Kurt Russell, Goldie Hawn, Darby Camp, Kimberly Williams-Paisley, Jahzir Bruno, Julian Dennison, Tyrese Gibson, Judah Lewis, Sonny Suljic, Darlene Love, and Malcolm McDowell. I'm Jesse. Thanks for joining me today. We have a Christmas-themed film, and it feels like I'm in the middle of winter. You can probably tell a little bit under the weather. So I do apologise for the nasally sorts of tones that you're going to hear in this episode. Hopefully you stick around and listen to this show. As always, if you haven't seen the Christmas Chronicles Part 2, or you haven't seen the first Christmas Chronicles film, probably give us a pause and come back a little bit later on, because there will be parts of both films that sort of get touched on as we chat about this film. And we do like to start the show off with the Fast Flicks, where we do a quick little summary of what the film's all about. So this one's about an excommunicated elf who wants to ruin Christmas, but some true believer kids team up with Santa to help the cause. As intriguing as I could possibly make a Christmas-themed kids film. That's where we're at for this one. How did this one end up on Netflix? So, obviously, if you've listened to our show from the start, there was the Christmas Chronicles 1. The first film was back released in 2018, so we did that quite a while ago. So this is a sequel to that film, and reprising their roles, we have Kurt Russell as Santa, as well as Goldie Hawn, Darby Camp, Judah Lewis, and Kimberly Williams-Paisley all playing the same roles. On May of 2020, on the 14th of May, a sequel, The Christmas Chronicles 2, was actually announced, and post-production was beginning. Original director Clay Cadis from the first film served as executive producer for this one. He dropped out and was replaced by Chris Columbus, who actually produced the first film, so they sort of switched roles in this one. The film did play in 3 cities at about 32 Cinemark theatres the week prior to its digital release on Netflix. This was the first time that Netflix had allowed one of its films to be played in a chain theatre, so that's an interesting little fact there. The film, when it was released, was the most watched item on Netflix in its debut weekend. Netflix later reported the film was watched by 61 million households over its first month. That is a lot of people. At the 42-minute mark, Santa and Mrs. Claus, they sleep by the fireplace, and the TV's playing a classic Christmas film, It's a Wonderful Life, from 1946, and this is in an Elvish language dub. This is something that Christopher Columbus, as a director, does in a lot of his films set around Christmas. So in Home Alone in 1990, another film directed by Chris Columbus, the McAllister family watched the film with a French dub while they're in Paris. In Home Alone 2, Lost in New York in 1992, the McAllister family once again watched the film, but this one it's in Spanish while they're in Florida. And in The Gremlins in 1984, which Christopher Columbus wrote, the Peltzer family watched the film on TV too. So nice little connection for Christmas-themed films with Christopher Columbus. Kurt Russell, who plays Santa in this film, he wrote a 200-page backstory for Santa Claus before filming began for the second film, embracing the mythology by filling in gaps about how Santa met Mrs. Claus, so he could really get into this character. So, interesting little thing there. Translations around the world for this one. In Chinese, it's called Christmas First Aid 2. I don't know, I don't get that one. And in Uzbek, it's called New Year's Calendar 2. So, some weird translations there. The working title for this film was just Christmas Chronicles 2 instead of The Christmas Chronicles Part 2, and the tagline for this one, a pretty ordinary tagline: "The battle to save Christmas is on." Oh god, could have come up with something better than that. This did hit Netflix on the 25th of November 2020. Had a few filming locations. A lot of the beach scenes were done in Cancun in Mexico. A lot of the other scenes were done in Vancouver in Canada. And they did do some exterior shots in Chicago from the 21st of October 2019 until the 1st of Feb 2020. This did have one nomination at the Annie Awards for Outstanding Achievement for Character Animation in a Live Action Production. And that will be for all of the elves that we see, which we'll talk about very, very shortly. What are the critics and audiences saying about this film? So, on Rotten Tomatoes, it sits at 64% on 59 reviews. That's just fresh. The audience has it a bit lower at 44%. That's on more than 500 ratings, so that's rotten from the audience. A little bit higher from IMDb, 36,000 ratings, sits at a 6 out of 10. Letterboxd, a little bit low again, 2.4 out of 5 on 35,000 ratings, but it's been logged by 55,000 people. And Metacritic, the audience and critics have it exactly the same. The critics have it at 51 out of 100 on 12 reviews. That is yellow in the middle bit of that traffic light system. Audience 5.1 out of 10 on 38 reviews, so also in that yellow section in the middle ground. What are my early thoughts for this one? Like I said before, we did an episode on the first film, but I don't remember any of the first film, not one little bit. So I mean, this film was fine. We had a couple of really good Christmas films that I've sort of covered on this show lately, so it's sort of tough to compare it with this because this is a little bit different, but this stands up fine as family entertainment. So that's where I'm at with this one. Let's talk about the characters. Obviously, we've got to talk about Santa. Santa is our big, boisterous character. He wants to deliver the Christmas joy to whoever he can. Obviously, the first film, they took Santa to the human, real world, whereas this film, we're sort of moved to his world of the North Pole and the mystics around that, I guess. So, Mrs. Claus played a little cameo at the end of the first film, and that was that big reveal that it was Goldie Hawn, and we know that Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn have been in a very long-term relationship. So to have her in this film was nice. She was sweet. I guess it was more a supporting role in the film. She had this side little story with the little boy Jack, so it was nice to see her too. But this story, I guess, is about the two kids that we see. So Kate, who we know from the first film, she's got her brother Teddy, the mother Claire, who's widowed. Kate's dad and Claire's husband's passed away, and she's got this new boyfriend. So that's the issue in this film, I guess. And his name's Bob, and he's got a little son called Jack, and Kate is horrible to both of them because she can't stand that idea of letting go of her father or the thought of his father. But she's still a true believer in Christmas. It's just that idea of what Christmas is sort of a little bit lost, I guess, and she needs Santa's help to rediscover what Christmas and family is all about. And I guess Jack, Bob's son too, he sort of provides a little bit of that. He's set up really early as that scaredy cat who's clearly going to overcome some fears and be a hero. Super annoying at the start until he's given some obstacles to overcome. And then I sort of mentioned too, he's got that little side story with Mrs. Claus as well. The villain, or the evil person in this film is Belznickel. He's this elf that Santa and Mrs. Claus adopted as their own child, and he's sort of gone rogue. The reasoning behind that, because Santa didn't have enough time for him because he's too busy focused on giving to all the kids of the world. Pretty poor reason, really. Pretty poor villain. So we'll probably talk about him a little bit more too. The director, Chris Columbus, sort of touched on him already in some of the films that he's done. Everyone knows him. He lives in this kid's world of film. Like, he's done those Percy Jackson films. He did the Pixels film with Adam Sandler, the first two Harry Potter films that you'd remember, and Mrs. Doubtfire and the Home Alone film. So this is his bread and butter, this type of film. Let's talk about some scenes. What are some scenes that I liked? What didn't I like about this one? So some standouts. I guess there's this continuous joke throughout with the kids that Santa's village should be called Mrs. Claus's village because she does all the work. So I thought that was quite good. I know a lot of people probably hated this scene, and I really disliked the elves for most of this film, but there was one cut moment where they'd gone crazy and they're dancing to the song "Who Let the Dogs Out" by the Baha Men, and they've got chainsaws and stuff. I thought that was funny. I thought that was really good. And the Boston airport scene, that they Santa and Kate rock up at Boston airport in 1990. They've sort of gone through a wormhole, traveled back in time. This is the best scene of the film. The whole Ferris Bueller rip-off lock-up scene where Kate is locked up. She meets her younger version of her dad and gets to say goodbye to her dad and move on, and Santa needs to bring back that Christmas spirit, so he rocks out with a song, and all the disgruntled passengers who are missing their flights get on board. I thought that was really well done, really cool, enjoyed that too. What didn't I like in this one? Kate and Jack, like I mentioned, they sort of get thrown through this portal, and they go this portal to the North Pole, and the first line when they arrive at the North Pole is, "We're not in Mexico anymore." Seriously, come on. That's pretty clear. I don't need you to verbalise that too. Kate and Jack, they get taken in by Santa and Mrs. Claus because they've almost frozen to death. And then there's this big, long focus on bringing Kate back and defrosting her, almost making sure she's okay. And they just leave Jack for so long. Poor Jack. I'm glad he was okay, but that just felt really weird. There's this drawn-out padding almost, this tour of Santa's village. And it was pointless. You don't need to know that Santa's done some video game coding in his time. Like, that was just lame. And like, the elves making candy canes, you get this whole scene of them and them making candy canes. Who cares? It didn't matter. Kate, she mentions that she's been to the Hall of Santa's Letters. There's this big sort of pole where there's Santa's letters, and then she turns to Jack and says, there's lots of things I haven't told you, Jack. This is like the soon-to-be stepbrother that she's ignored the whole film. She's refused to talk to him. Of course she hasn't told him this. Just absolutely blatantly clear. The whole bedtime story of the Christmas Chronicles, Mrs. Claus sits down with the kids and gives this backstory of Santa. Like, it just went on. The point of that scene should have been to tell us the story of Belsnickel, and then we move on. That's all we needed. And finally, the whole final scene, like, everyone holding hands, singing the carol, "O Christmas Tree." Kate's voice was so auto-tuned, like so poorly. It was just really poor, really lame. Didn't like that. What's this film trying to say? Lots of good stuff. There's lots of good stuff to take away from this film. Like that idea of mixed families and finding that balance between moving on and reflecting and respecting the past too, and dealing with change. And to deal with change too, it's much better to express your feelings rather than running off on your own or causing havoc as well. And that idea too, the true believers of Christmas, that faith in Christmas will help you and bring you along, because that idea of who you spend Christmas with is much more important than where you spend it, because the importance of family, they're always going to be there for you. And then for Santa and Mrs. Claus too, I guess there's that void of children and what some people are missing out on or have to choose to live without, that can be quite sad at this time of year too. All right, what did I take away from this one? The CGI of the actual elves was decent. The Jaguar thing, Jola, was woeful, and the elves were so painful. Just didn't give anything to this film. The other thing that ties in, I guess, is Julian Dennison as Belsnickel. I like him. I like his humour, and I probably expected more, because, he's funny, and in this he was probably mediocre at best, and that's probably because the character written for him wasn't very villainous, but he still could have brought some of his humour to the table, so I was a little bit disappointed there. We have a section where we say, hey, did we have to jump onto IMDb throughout the film to check anyone out? There were two that were so clear. I was so happy with myself, I didn't even need to check it out. Tyrese, when he rocks up as that father, Bob, the dad, just straight away, it's like, Tyrese, the musician, from Fast and Furious. So that was a good one. This one took me a couple of scenes to work out, and I don't know why, but the brother, Teddy, Kate's brother, Teddy, I was like, your face is so familiar. And then I was like, he's from The Babysitter. So if you've seen, there's two babysitter films on Netflix. We've done episodes for both. There's The Babysitter and then the Babysitter Killer Queen, I think it was called. Very familiar once you recognise his face. Some questions, some ponderings. I've only got one sort of thing. The elves. And Santa, I guess, and Kate at times, why did they need to speak in the elvish language? You could have saved so much time. Could have saved so much research, so much writing of dialogue, so much learning of random words, and just have them all speak in English. It didn't add anything to the story that they spoke in Elvish, so that was a bit frustrating. All right, I'm ready to wrap this up. We give the films that we cover a rating out of 5. From the first film, MJ, who used to be on the show quite a lot with me, he was a huge fan of the first film, and I did sort of tee him up a little bit early on to say, hey, the second one's coming up. Unfortunately, life sort of gets in the way, so he couldn't jump on. The first one, like, as I said, I didn't remember the first one. I looked at my original rating, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5, so a fairly decent score from me. Like, this film, the second one, it's nowhere near a 3.5 star film, but it's still got some great messages, in amongst some real poor CGI, I guess. I'm giving this a 3 out of 5. 3 out of 5 for me. Solid score. We're on socials. We have Instagram, we have Facebook, and we have X, formerly known as Twitter. I just want to put it out there. Do you reckon they're going to make a third film? Have these first two films been successful enough that they put some money aside and go, cool, let's check in on these kids in the future and see if they still have that Christmas spirit, when they're in their late teens. I reckon that might be a good little plot for a story. Anyway, we are back next week. Next week, we have an international film from 2020. It's the Italian action thriller called The Beast, or La Belva. It's directed by Ludovico Di Martino and stars Fabrizio Guffini, Lino Musella, and Monica Pisiddu. That's what we've got next week, an Italian action thriller. I'm excited. That should be good. Keen to check it out. Hope you are too. Give it a watch before next week. Join me then. And as always, thanks for sticking out today and listening, even if you can't understand me through my nasal issues. We'll see you next week.